Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi, and this is Scope. Since the attack in Pulwama, India has sought to escalate tensions with Pakistan. Its tactics include warnings to Pakistanis to leave Rajasthan, putting on hold Track 2 people-to-people initiatives, and repeating threats of stemming river water flow into Pakistan. The anti-Pakistan hysteria has resulted in the lynching of a Pakistani prisoner in an Indian jail, as well as rejection of visas for Pakistani athletes. On the latter, the International Olympic Committee has reacted, suspending all future events India would host. To discuss all of that a bit further, we're joined now by our esteemed guests, former Ambassador Najmuddin Shaikh, who is joining us now from Karachi. We're also joined by retired Air Marshal Shahid Latif, who is a defense analyst as well. He's joining us from Islamabad. And we're also joined finally by retired Major General Ijaz Awan, who is also a defense analyst, and he is joining us from the Pakistani capital as well. We appreciate all of you joining us here in the Scope. Ambassador Shaikh, I'd like to start with you and get your thoughts about what's occurred over these past days since that attack in Pulwama and India's actions.
Well, I think you mentioned the International Olympic Committee's decision, and of course you should add to that the ICC warning that if they do not play Pakistan, as they have threatened not to do, then they will just lose 2 points. So that's one element. But the other element I think that one needs to look at is what happened in the United Nations and the resolution that was adopted by the UN Security Council. I'm a little unhappy about the manner in which our media has failed to follow up on two things that should have happened. First, that Mr. Adil Dar was arrested in September 1917, and at that time he had claimed that he was a Hizbul Mujahideen militant or freedom fighter.
Let me see if I can go to Air Marshal Shahid Latif. Air Marshal, what do you make of India's actions recently? As Ambassador Shaikh there was talking about, we did have this resolution at the United Nations Security Council as well.
Look, this is not something new that India is doing. First of all, we know the pattern in India. Every time elections are about to be held, we know what India will do. In order to start enhancing operation in the area of Kashmir, and secondly, raising voices against Pakistan, and particularly some of the banned outfits in Pakistan, and simulate an act of terrorism and say that this is being done and this is being done on the behest of Pakistan. So I think this is nothing new that has happened. Right now, what you're watching India do is two things. One, obviously to appease and to please the local people, they are involving Pakistan and raising the same question of terrorism, because in the whole world, they are the people who have actually convinced the national community, or have tried to convince the national community that it is Pakistan behind terrorism, whereas we know that it is India that has kind of forced terrorism on Pakistan. And it is through Afghanistan that they have been spreading terrorism in Pakistan. And if at all, Pakistan is the victim, not a terrorist country. We have been victims of terrorism. And thousands of lives have been sacrificed in order to fight against terrorism. Indeed. So that's one. And two, what they're doing is also kind of appealing to the national community that, look, this is an issue we've been highlighting again and again, and Pakistan has once again committed terrorism against India. So I think these are the two factors that they are trying to harp on.
If I may, I'd like to pick up on those points you just made there, Air Marshal, and put that to General Ijaz Awan. General Awan, I wonder, what do you make of the situation? Is this, as the Air Marshal there said, is this a lot about just domestic Indian politics and Modi and the BJP trying to essentially strengthen their position going into these elections?
One could be that India is trying to boost its position. The BJP is trying to cash on this incident for the forthcoming elections. But more than that, in fact, the reality is that there is the indigenous struggle in Kashmir for their right of self-determination that was given to them since 1947 and by the United Nations resolution. Now, that has been denied to them for the last 70 long years. And now when they are demanding the same, India is trying to use massive force. They are using rape as a weapon of war, and then they are using pellet guns to blind the people. And they have killed over 95,000 Kashmiris in this struggle. Now, when the reaction comes from the people of Indian-occupied Kashmir, they are trying to externalize this struggle and trying to blame on the Pakistan or Pakistan-based defunct organizations that are already banned and they are not allowed to function. So those banned organizations, it is a claim which was made, I don't know from what source, maybe sources placed in India. They tried to make this claim and try to blame it on the Jaish-e-Mohammed. So there is no authenticity of this claim. So I personally feel it is the indigenous struggle which is being externalized, and to prove that, they have moved to the United Nations for passage of this resolution.
And that's a very good point you've made there. Ambassador Shaikh, I wanted to get your thoughts because, in fact, Prime Minister Imran Khan also brought up that very point that General Awan just brought up about how India needs to, do some introspection about why the people of Indian-occupied Kashmir have lost, in the Prime Minister's words, fear of death. What do you make of that, Ambassador?
That's absolutely true, but what is even truer and what establishes that alienation of the Kashmiri people from India is general. It is not only the Indian armed forces, they are alienated from India per se. And ironically, this particular incident has shown that the Indians do not regard Kashmiris as Indians. Wherever the Kashmiris are in India today, they are being prosecuted, they are being expelled, they are having to go back to Kashmir because the Indians do not accept them as Indians. Now that is a point that has become very clear in these last 10 days of the Kashmiris being expelled from all parts of India, or being put in secure places and being controlled, or of vice chancellors being dismissed because they were reluctant to expel the Kashmiri students from their universities. So that's point one. But the point two is that really we need to do more work. We have a situation where the Kashmiris have, the claim has been made that this was a Jaish-e-Mohammed incident. But if you look carefully at the statement, the departmental press briefing by the State Department on the 19th of this month, it says that the perpetrator named the organization. It was not somebody from Pakistan, it was not a Mr. Hussain or whatever. According to them, it was the perpetrator who named it. Now, this perpetrator was in fact arrested in September of 2017 by the Indians. How he got released, how he then became from Hizb Mujahideen, which is what he claimed to be at that time, how he became Jaish-e-Mohammed, one does not know. This is something that we should be exploring and putting before the world. Therefore, I think that when they say that the Jaish-e-Mohammed in the Security Council resolution, they mean exactly what the State Department said, that this is something that was claimed by the perpetrator. Now, the perpetrator was was not Jaish at that time. He was Hizb Mujahideen. How did he get out? How did he then become converted to Jaish-e-Mohammed? This we have to try and explore and find out what this is about. So this is an issue on which we should be focusing more than we have so far.
Indeed.
Secondly, we have to make this fact known more widely than it is known so far. This should be the linchpin in our campaign versus this on this particular issue. Now, with regard to the charges of terrorism, let us acknowledge that we have this particular charge has resonance because terrorism is a buzzword now. It's the flavor of the decade.
Right.
So so long as this can be attached to us, this sort of thing will find resonance. And we have to tackle that particular problem.
Indeed. If I may, I'd like to go to Air Marshal Shaikh now. Air Marshal, what do you make of then this anti-Pakistan hysteria, which is really going through all red lines and bounds in India at this point? We've already spoken about the fact that this is likely connected to the election campaign in India. But then, do you think this is a bit of India playing with fire as well? Because we have, of course, Prime Minister Imran Khan legitimately saying, of course, that Pakistan would immediately retaliate if there were any aggression from the Indian side. Do you think that the Indians would actually make such a mistake?
Look, first of all, I agree with you that India is playing with fire. And it's not for the first time that India is doing this. India has been doing this every odd day. There are violations at the LOC. So knowing that these two neighboring countries are both have atomic power, and the whole world actually needs to focus on this point. And we say it again and again, and the world acknowledges that Kashmir is a flashpoint here. And we better understand what do we mean by that. And when they say that, indulging in a nuclear war is an act of MAD, which means mutually assured destruction, the widespread destruction that it can cause. And what India is doing is, particularly the leadership, and that to Mr. Modi, he is risking the lives of nearly 1.5 billion people, both in India and Pakistan, and being so selfish that for a limited purpose of gaining success in the forthcoming elections, he is putting at stake the entire region. So this is what we also need to highlight to the world. And as our Prime Minister said, and he's given a very intelligent statement. In one part, he's addressing the world, where he says that if you have any evidence, come up and we will carry out a joint inquiry. So what we are telling the world that we want peace in this region. And this is a step towards peace, and we have shown these gestures not once, every time we ask India to come to the negotiation table. They don't. And on one pretext or the other, they always violate this. And secondly, what he has said is for India, that if you think that after you get into some adventurism against Pakistan, we will contemplate and we will think about a retaliation, you are sadly mistaken. There'll be no thinking. And yesterday in our National Security Committee, he's already allowed the armed forces to take a strong action if there is any act of aggression by India. So I think the Prime Minister has given a holistic statement, and which is not only for India, it is for the world as well.
I wanted to hone in on what you said there, Air Marshal, about this talk of Pakistan has asked for evidence, if there is any, and for India to present it really to the world and to itself. General, I wonder what you make of that, because Pakistan and Prime Minister Imran Khan essentially just asking for transparency, saying, listen, you can't just accuse us, present the evidence, and let's talk about this if you have any evidence. What do you make of that?
Pakistan has always asked for evidence, and they said before you accuse any organization, defunct organization, or the state of government of Pakistan, you better provide the evidence. Now it goes back to the Samjhota Express, it goes back to the attack on the parliament where Afzal Guru was hanged in haste. Then it goes on to the Mumbai attack and attack on Pathankot and Uri. In all these cases, even in case of Pathankot, we had dispatched an inquiry team, investigation team to India on their request, which was not given access to Pathankot base and the scene of incident. They were not given access. So this has been our position always. We have in all these 5 incidents where Pakistan was accused for being behind these perpetrators or those who have done this act of terrorism in India. So Pakistan has always asked for the evidence and allowed them to share with us, and we would like to participate in the investigation, interrogation, and then getting hold of those people if they are found involved and they reside in Pakistan. Now, this has been our position, but India never came up with any evidence. Contrary to this, our diplomacy, I would say on the diplomatic front, we have not been as assertive and forthright as we could have been. In the days of Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, when he himself was the foreign minister, unfortunately, we did not raise those issues at the United Nations or even in at the bilateral level, where we have the smoking gun which is with us today, Kulbhushan Yadav, which is a clear example of state-sponsored terrorism by India in Pakistan. When a serving colonel, rank of a colonel, the person who was an agent handler was caught in Pakistan, he was provided a travel document, passport, with the fake name of Mubarak Hussain Patil. And this issue is being highlighted. The case is sub judice even today, where India went. India took the case to International Court of Justice, and we agreed to this because we knew we have a stronger position in this, and India would be found guilty in this. The facts are in our favor. So that is the worst example of state-sponsored terrorism. They do not have any such example of people who are involved in acts of terrorism in India, and they have a...
And General Awan, I will interrupt you just because we've run out of time. That was a very appropriate point to end this segment on, and we appreciate you bringing up that very important point. I'd like to thank, of course, all of our guests who have joined us for this segment in this important discussion. We were joined by former Ambassador Najmuddin Shaikh, who was speaking to us from Karachi. We were also joined by retired Air Marshal Shahid Latif, who is also a defense analyst. He was speaking to us from Islamabad. And, of course, we were also joined by retired Major General Ijaz Awan, who is also a defense analyst and was joining us from the Pakistani capital. Now, viewers, at the end there, General Awan brought up the Gulbashan Jalal case, which is an important case to bring up in the context of everything that is occurring these days as well. That case, of course, in front of the ICJ, the International Court of Justice. Pakistan has presented its counter-arguments to Indian complaints. That's why, essentially, this case went to the ICJ. That adds context, of course, to the situation. Many people would argue that India is looking to distract the world and its own people possibly from that situation and the fact that it is losing that case at this point in time. We'll keep a very close eye on all developments when it comes to India's actions towards Pakistan since that Pulwama attack. Stay with us here in The Scope. I'll be back with our next segment after this break. Viewers, welcome back to The Scope. In this segment, we're going to discuss how Israel has severely restricted Palestinian access to the Al-Aqsa Mosque through the Al-Rahma Gate since 2003. The new Islamic Waqf, formed by Jordan that now includes Palestinian officials, has sought to end that ban. Israel's provocations in this regard come at a time that its election campaign is beginning. Netanyahu is reaching out to extremist far-right groups, while a centrist opposition alliance poses a significant threat to him. To discuss all of that a bit further, we're joined now by Mr. Hassan Ben Imran, who is the director at One Justice, and he's joining us from Istanbul. We're also joined with Mr. Muslim Imran, who is a Palestinian activist, and he is joining us from Kuala Lumpur. He's also the president of the Palestinian Cultural Organization in Malaysia. Thank you both for joining us. Hassan, I'll start with you, if I may. What do you make of the tensions at the Al-Aqsa Mosque this past week?
Before speaking about the measures that have been taken by the illegal occupation authorities in Jerusalem, we have to make the point that merely the Israeli existence in East Jerusalem has been called illegal, not just by activists or by politicians. It has been called so by the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, the highest and the most supreme international court for justice, created by the statute that has created the United Nations. So simply speaking of an Israeli presence, prolonged presence in East Jerusalem is an act of colonialism, since anything that is done with the intent of prolonging one occupation from merely security measures, that's called a form of colonialism. Now when it comes to these measures have very difficult or very dangerous consequences. Al-Aqsa Mosque, as everyone knows, has a very special status in the hearts of millions of Muslims around the world. Taking similar actions by restricting Muslims from entering to a place of worship to which they are entitled to reach is, I think, a very provocative act that has absolutely no security purpose, but to Israel feels that, like, if we see it in the context of a spoiled kid seeking the protection of his father in a very corrupt country. This corrupt country is the world we live in, unfortunately. This powerful father is the United States. Israel is acting as a spoiled kid, giving really little care about what's it doing.
All right, Hassan, the line with you is not the best, so the audio quality is a bit low. Let me go to Muslim for a moment. Muslim Imran, tell us what your thoughts are about what's happening at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and specifically about the Islamic Waqf, if we may comment on that. Do you think the addition of Palestinian officials as members of the Waqf is a good move by Jordan?
Okay, good evening to you and to people watching, I'd like to highlight that the ongoing Israeli violations in the city of Jerusalem are a continuation of a series of violations. Israel's government have an already well-prepared plan to transform the identity of the city of Jerusalem. In 1982, the city of Jerusalem was declared the unified eternal capital of Israel. And ever since that day, the Israeli government have been working very hard to change the identity of the city of Jerusalem, and in particular, the Haram al-Sharif or Al-Aqsa Mosque. The policies that have been in place will certainly, if not resisted, result in the Muslim and Christian identities of the city of Jerusalem to be obliterated. That's why what the Palestinians are doing now in the city of Jerusalem is to restore the status quo and to protect the Al-Aqsa Mosque and their identity of Haram Sharif and the city of Jerusalem. The Palestinian as well as the Jordanian authorities have been trying to highlight the Israeli practices and violations, but apparently practices go unnoticed. It is due to the Palestinian uprising that is taking place in the city of Jerusalem that the Israeli violations have attracted some media attention. So
Muslim, if I may come in, if I may come in, because the Israelis, I imagine, would argue, Muslim, that the Bab al-Rahma has been closed since 2003. So why would the Islamic Waqf now, in 2019, want to open it? What's changed now that gate needs to be opened?
Al-Rahma is illegal. So even though it happened in 2000, it was an Israeli violation, and it went unnoticed, of course. And it was difficult to pressure Israel to reopen it in 2003 because we were going through an that started in 2002, and Israel was creating a total mess in the West Bank. The Palestinians were under huge pressure. But coming back to the current developments, as I said earlier, Israel is trying to transform the identity of the city of Jerusalem. So, completely change the situation overnight. They are doing it gradually. And one of the steps was to close the gates of Bab al-Rahma a few days ago with new locks and to instate an Israeli police outpost near the gates or the Bab al-Rahma. And that tells the Palestinians who have been observing the developments in Al-Aqsa Mosque, Haram Sharif on a daily basis, that tells them that Israel is making a new move. 2 years ago, if you remember, was an uprising in Al-Asbab Gate, another gate of that when Israel was installing the electronic gates, it was basically trying to make a move on Al-Aqsa Mosque to take over the mosque, whether through spatial division or
Okay, so Muslim, if you allow me, I wanted to put that point then to Hassan. Hassan, I believe, is with us now back on the line. Hassan, tell us, do you think that the Israelis, that their agenda here is to take over the Al-Aqsa Mosque?
I believe with the current political formula that Netanyahu is forming, the Prime Minister of Israel is forming, I think the religious aspect is really being important right now. Netanyahu has been forming a coalition, and now is going to form even a more radical and extreme far-right coalition with the Jewish Home and with the Jewish power political parties that have clear religious agenda to turn into Jerusalem or to change the identity of Jerusalem from its current Muslim and Christian identities. Jerusalem has been ruled for centuries by different Muslim political entities. This identity has been reinforced over generations. These political parties see it as one of their major priorities is to change this identity into something that erases anything that has to do with the past of Jerusalem.
But Hassan, it's not just the political parties, though, right? I mean, I was reading a poll today by an Israeli NGO called Commanders for Israel Security, CIS, which advocates for a two-state solution. It says that only 11% of Israeli voters care about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict when it comes to these upcoming elections. That shows a disconnect, does it not, between what Israeli voters and Israelis live. Their reality is different from the reality of Palestinians. It's not just the parties then, right? The parties are reflecting the people.
When I say the party, like these parties are running for the electorate.
Yes.
They are trying to gain the votes. So the more right they sound, the more extremist in their demands they are, these political parties will gain more in the election. Even the Israeli left has come so close to the right-wing demands of these segments of the population. So by giving them more promises of this sort, that let's say they are going to restrict Palestinian movement in Jerusalem, they are going to close this mosque and shut that mosque, they're going to put some electronic structures around Al-Aqsa mosque, etc. They know that they will get more votes. So unfortunately, the electoral behavior is very dangerous, very moving in a very unhealthy direction in Israel. The political parties are obviously not responsible. They're not acting as a responsible entity, but as an entity that wants more votes by giving in to these, popular or populist demands on the ground.
So then if we're talking about these elections, then if we may, then for a few more moments, Hassan, I wonder, what do you make of this centrist alliance that has been created against Netanyahu? Do you think that stands a chance of winning? Does it matter when it comes to the Palestinians?
About the chances of winning, it's pretty clear that the right is there to stay in the right-wing parties. It seems that any party that would want to rule Israel right now has to lean more clearly to the right. Any party with any agendas that do not clearly speak of, ignore any political solution with the Palestinian, not giving in to the Palestinian, any party that doesn't come with this agenda will not win in the elections. Netanyahu understands this very well. So as someone who really doesn't give much attention to moral calculation, he allied himself with the far and ultra-right political parties like the Jewish Home and the Jewish Power. Jewish Power is the successor of the Kahan movement, which has been banned even within Israel for wanting to establish a theocracy and for even resorting sometimes to violent means. It has been designated as terrorist even by the FBI, which is supposed, to be like FBI belongs to the US, which is the main supporter of Israel. So you can imagine the political scene in Israel, how scary it's becoming, how extremist it is becoming. So when it comes to the Palestinian, the whole Israeli spectrum, unfortunately, is a cut-off right-wing. They all look very right-wing when it comes to their policies towards the Palestinians, when it comes to speaking of any political solutions. Let's just look at the disengagement plan in 2005 from Gaza. Sharon, he seemed as someone who would want a two-state solution by just simply pulling out of Gaza. But if we look at the political discourse at that time in Israel, no one will speak of the two-state solution or withdrawing from Gaza to open the door for two states.
Do you think that it's actually more important for the Palestinians to enter into a peace deal now? Because, if the Israeli society continues moving more right, what chances are there for any peace in the future?
Unfortunately, the question is the answer is not going to be what everyone who loves peace would want.
Okay.
Of course, Palestinians have tried each and every possible way to reach to the minimal level of a fair solution. Yet they have been met with a very solid, uncompromising, very arrogant responses on the other side. And now with the current regional situation, and as I give you an example of a spoiled kid in a corrupt country with a very powerful father. That's exactly how the behavior of Israel could be explained. Basically, they have little reason for providing or for wanting peace. They are the powerful side right now, not the Palestinians. They are the ones who can give up. It's not giving up. It's basically giving the Palestinians their rights. They are the ones who can make that. Yet they have little reason or little interest in anything like this, which is very sad. But that's the current situation.
Okay, so then let's talk about any pressure that can be placed on Israel. Do you think that, for example, there's a committee within Jordan's parliament which has called for the expulsion of Israel's ambassador, from Amman, and for the Jordanian ambassador to be called back from Tel Aviv? Do you think that such moves are important? What kind of pressure do they place, if any, on Israel?
Of course, any kind of diplomatic pressure on Israel would yield results. Israel is acting this way because simply they lost previously they had this concern of their international relations opening up to Africa, to Asia, to the Arab world. Sadly, this has been eliminated. It has not been counted. A few days ago you had in the Warsaw summit, you had Netanyahu meeting with all these foreign ministers. So, of course, any diplomatic pressure would at least make Israel want to discuss a solution. But the current image is not it doesn't seem like any regional power is really interested in pushing, the peace process forward. Or
Very
at
well,
least
Hassan.
for,
Right.
confronting the United States, which is
Right.
very blindly supporting. It's clearly it's not even considering any other agenda or not considering any other interests for any regional power but Israel. So it doesn't seem like anyone is interested in confronting the United States. No one is interested in prolonging their problems with Israel because this will have very catastrophic ends when it comes to the United States. So sadly, we don't see any pressure coming from any side. But if there was, I'm sure this pressure would do something.
We're going to say thank you now to Hassan Ben Imran, who is speaking to us from Istanbul. He's director at One Justice. We're also going to thank Muslim Imran, president of the Palestinian Cultural Organization in Malaysia, who is speaking to us from Kuala Lumpur. We thank them both for their insight and analysis. We're going to add another voice to this conversation. We're now joined by Mr. Iran Bar Yoshafat, who is an attorney, and he's joining us from close to Tel Aviv. Iran, thanks for taking your time out to speak to us here in the scope. Iran, what do you make of this centrist party that has been brought forth in Israel? Do you think that actually provides a threat to Netanyahu going forward?
Well, first of all, I have to be honest here. I'm also running for one of the parties. But I think that what is the main issue in Israel is the fact that we are working as a parliamentary democracy, meaning you need to build a coalition. And right now, the coalitions are the same. You still don't have enough people from the center and the left to create a coalition. No one who was going to vote for the Jewish House Party is now going to vote for Gantz because they are now united. They're not going to change their ideology. So a nice slogan, it can create a lot of headlines, but the fact of the matter is we have 120 seats in the parliament, 60 plus are considered to be right-wing, 60 minus are considered to be left-wing, and within this left-wing chunk, I also include between 10 to 13 seats who are Arab parties who will not agree to sit in the coalition. So to begin with, the left-wing is always smaller.
So then, Iran, let's talk about Netanyahu. He tweeted two right-wing parties and the Jewish Strength Party, which I believe may be called the Jewish Power Party too, if I'm not mistaken. You can correct me on that. But that party is even in Israel is seen as I believe a terrorist organization. At least that's what it's named by the U.S. I believe. And in 1994, it was banned outright in Israel under its anti-terror laws. Why do you think Prime Minister Netanyahu want to reach out to such a party?
Yeah, well, look, the fact that sometimes people call another person a fascist or a Nazi doesn't really make them so. The Kahana Party was actually excluded from the Israeli parliament.
Okay, it seems having some audio difficulties there with Ran, but of course we do appreciate the insight that he brought to this discussion as well. That was Ran Bar Yoshafat, attorney who was speaking to us from close to Tel Aviv. We will try to have him back on a later show to, of course, continue that discussion with him. Viewers, we're going to conclude this specific segment, and of course it's important to bring out the fact that what's happened at Al-Aqsa, as always, on the part of the Palestinian Muslims specifically, to who Al-Aqsa is very dear, they would say this is provocative. That's what Al-Fatah party of the President Mahmoud Abbas has called this move. Of course, we have the Islamic Waqf now, which includes Palestinian officials, and that's an important move, as our guest there said earlier. Then there is, of course, internal Israeli politics as well, what effect that will have on any chance of peace with Palestinians, considering Israeli actions recently in contemporary years. We'll keep a very close eye on that here in the scope, but don't go anywhere. I'll be back after a short break with our next segment. Thank you for staying with us here in the scope, ladies and gentlemen. The crisis in Venezuela seems to be reaching a tipping point. Juan Guaido, the self-appointed interim leader of the country, says he will personally go to the border with Colombia to bring in humanitarian aid. Nicolas Maduro, the president of the country, says America cannot both sanction and claim to provide aid at the same time, and has asked for borders to be closed. Will there be a confrontation at Venezuela's borders? To discuss all of that a bit further, we're joined now by Daniel Sierra, who is a political strategist and director of the think tank Venezuela Idea Lab. He's joining us from the Venezuelan capital, Caracas. We're also joined by Gabriel Clavijo, who is a political analyst. He's a teacher in political sciences and researcher in human rights and Latin American studies. He's joining us from Bogota in Colombia. Thank you both for joining us. Gabriel, I'd like to start with you, if I may, because this aid is supposed to come in from the Colombian side of the border. Guaido is supposed to go there. What is the feeling in the country right now about that situation?
Answering your question, I think that the situation here in Colombia, in the border with Venezuela, is very dangerous for us. As I told you as a Colombian, because we have two problems very big here in the country. The first one is the massive immigration of refugees. The refugees from Venezuela, they are hiding for the crisis there in Venezuela. The another one is the position of Maduro to become in a war with Colombia, because Colombia supports the position of Guaido, the position of the opposition in Venezuela, Then the official president Maduro is in a position very aggressive with the governments of the region, especially Colombia, because we share a lot of kilometers of in the frontier. We have a problem right now, a diplomatic problem here in Colombia, because we count with the support of Donald Trump and the United States and almost all the international community. But Maduro have the support of China and Russia. And Russia and China take a position very strong with Venezuela, and they are suggesting a confrontation, armies confrontation here in the territory, in the border of the frontier with the United States. Maybe,
okay, so let me then bring in Daniel, if you allow me, Gabriel. Daniel, what do you make of the situation when it comes to the border with Colombia and that humanitarian aid? We know that Maduro has closed the border with Brazil right now. He's threatened to do the same with Colombia. We know Guaido is apparently on his way to the border with Colombia to bring in that aid. This is quite a volatile situation, isn't it?
Thank you for having me. And first, I would have to agree with my colleague Clavijo. This is a very difficult situation for Colombia as well. And as a Venezuelan, I would like to thank the Colombian people, because Colombia has taken more than 1.5 million refugees. That number is an outstanding number. It has put a lot of pressure into their finances, social relations, and the first thing we must do is thank Colombia for all their efforts. Going to the specific problem at the border today is that the government of Colombia is trying to assist in the delivery of the humanitarian aid to Venezuela, but the dictatorship in Venezuela is blocking the border for that humanitarian aid not to arrive. And one has to question what kind of motives lies behind this action when you have a population that is clearly suffering a humanitarian crisis. How can you close the border for humanitarian aid not to receive it?
But Daniel, as you know, if you allow me, Daniel, as you know, Maduro's argument when it comes to the stance you've just taken is that Maduro says, listen, it was the United States to begin with that sanctioned Venezuela and has brought in this situation. So how can the U.S. now give aid, which is less than, in fact, the effect of the sanctions, and say, we want to help you? You know what I mean? He's talking about that hypocrisy. What do you say to that?
Yes, sanctions are first individual sanctions for regime operators, and then financial sanctions for debt instruments of the Venezuelan Republic. Sanctions do not affect humanitarian goods. Sanctions do not affect sanctions do not affect food. Sanctions do not affect medicine, and they're explicit in that. Any U.S. company can sell food and medicine to Venezuela. There is no kind of bureaucratic obstacle in order to buy and sell humanitarian goods from the United States or any other country in the world. This is an excuse for the regime's failure to have a proper economy. This is the situation in Venezuela is a catastrophe made by the policies of the socialist dictatorship. And it has absolutely nothing to do with the sanctions that are very targeted to individuals and very targeted to specific debt instruments of the Venezuelan Republic. Nothing humanitarian.
Okay, so Gabriel, let me bring you back in then. Tell me that from where you're sitting, Gabriel, about how much Colombia wants the situation to be resolved. Because as Daniel there pointed out, 1.5 million Venezuelans coming over the border into Colombia obviously has put a lot of pressure on Colombia. Do you think Colombia's stance is correct in supporting Guaido at this time?
I don't know. The position is very confused because it's a risk that the Colombian government is taking, because right now the president of Colombia have a political position very close to Guaido and very close with Trump. I think as an analyst, as a researcher, is very dangerous because right now Colombia have a lot of problems inside of the country. You know, the situation of the refugees is very, very, very hard for us because we have to provide food, education, and health to a population very strong that is getting inside of the country without control. You know, right now I think that we have to provide all of that support to that people and stop to get high the tension between Colombia and Maduro. You know, I think that the diplomatic ways is better. I think that the diplomatic ways of the talkings to get out of the crisis there in Venezuela is the best way. But unfortunately, here in Colombia, inside of the country, is blowing winds of war. You know, a lot of people is talking about war with Venezuela. And this is the worst. Is the worst that could happen with Colombia. You know, Colombia is an economy is growing up very fast. We have progress in the economics, and a war is the worst thing that could happen in a country.
And that's a very good point which you brought there, Gabriel, because Daniel, that is something that many people are talking about. Even Maduro has warned about a confrontation taking place at some point in time. Do you think that the region is about to be set on fire?
No, I do not think so, and I don't think this is the plan of any of the actors of the region. I believe, as my colleague Clavijo is saying, that the diplomatic option is prevailing, and there is a diplomatic a strategy in order to increase pressure on the dictatorship of Maduro for him to establish a final negotiation process.
But with due respect, Daniel, diplomacy requires negotiations at some point, doesn't it? There's no plan on Guaido's part to negotiate with Maduro, is there?
Well, yes. So the amnesty law has been put forward. I believe that this is a great instrument towards the transition. And the Venezuelan National Assembly, which is the Congress of the country, has repeatedly established that it wishes to enter into a negotiation process that leads to the the end of the usurpation of power, because we are not in a situation that could be resolved by an internal tribunal of the country. This is an usurpation of power of a president that had to leave office on January 10th, and he didn't leave. So imagine that in your country, the president just decides not to leave office, establish sham elections, and continues there. So this usurpation of power has to cease. Actually, Juan Guaido was not self-appointed. He is the president of Congress. The president of Congress, and as such, the third in line for succession, since there is no president and vice president elected because they are usurping power. Yeah. It is the constitution that appoints Juan Guaido as the interim president of Venezuela. So it's the constitutional president of Venezuela, Juan Guaido, that is asking Maduro for an amnesty process in order for them to cease usurpation and leave power peacefully. And
okay, just because we're running out of time, I'm going to interrupt you, Daniel, to give the final word to Gabriel. Gabriel, one of the things is that, as Daniel there mentioned, that stance, many Venezuelans who support Maduro would disagree with that stance, for example. So there is this division within Venezuela, isn't there, Gabriel? And I wonder, is that also dangerous, do you think, sitting from where you are, for the region?
Yes. In Venezuela, the situation is the next one. Maduro have the support among around 20 million of Venezuelans there in Venezuela. Right now, the number of the refugees of Venezuela outside of the country is around 5 million of people there in Latin America, United States, and Europe. Yeah. Right now, the support of Maduro in Venezuela is based especially with the army, because Maduro have a special relation with the army forces there in Venezuela. They are the army forces support all the regime, the political regime there in Venezuela. The people there in Venezuela have a special situation because the model of government of Maduro was very financed by the petroleum, the money of the petroleum. Venezuela is very rich in the petroleum. Right now, the people there in Venezuela.
Okay, Gabriel, we're going to leave that as our final word. I do apologize for interrupting. That's an important point to conclude on, and I appreciate you bringing that up about the Venezuelan economy's dependence on oil. That was Gabriel Clavijo, political analyst, speaking to us from Bogota in Colombia, and we were also joined by Mr. Daniel Sierra, political strategist, who is speaking to us from Caracas in Venezuela. We appreciate both of their times and insight and analysis. Of course, viewers, as both of our guests spoke about, there is major global implications to all of this, because there are actors on both sides, those who support Maduro, those countries, I should say, that support Maduro, such as Russia, China, and others. And on the other side, of course, we have Guaido's supporters, such as the U.S. and many Latin American countries as well, of course, such as Colombia and others, such as Brazil. This, of course, creating a complicated situation when it comes to humanitarian aid as well. I brought up sanctions earlier, which is Maduro's argument in all of this as well. A developing fluid situation. We'll see what happens when Guaido reaches the Colombian border, if he does at all. And we'll of course, keep a very close eye on that situation in Venezuela here in The Scope. But that's all for the moment. I've been Waqar Rizvi, and thanks for watching.